I think it was before yeah, it was before I'd even stopped working for that farmer back in Washington. But anyway, yeah, I guess we can start the stream if
The
you
stream's
haven't
already
already.
the stream's already started, but
Oh,
I
okay.
think it'd be a good idea for you to explain what we were talking about before the stream started
Oh, all right.
while I go shill the stream.
So, yeah, Heretic and I, well, something that's been shared around in the Backalley server. While Heretic and I aren't really like particularly interested in the outcome of the election necessarily, because I
You
see the
to
whole thing as
explain
being
what we
planned, or at the very least, we've argued pretty conclusively, and we've proven, both Heretic and I, pretty conclusively that regardless of the outcome of an election, the state has organizational interests that are not really affected by it, and the state could just simply choose not to not to do whatever the election was for, however you want to phrase that. Um, Not to institute any of these legislative decrees, and it's not even really conclusive whether or not it's not even really necessarily. We don't even really necessarily know if these are honestly like the results of votes being counted, or whether or not the state's just making these numbers up. But the fact of the matter is that Voot Day happened yesterday, and yeah, it looks like regardless of how this happened, I'm just trying to phrase this in a way so it seems, somewhat uncontroversial. But it looks like the state is claiming that I was legitimately about to say Bo Biden, but Joe Biden Joe Biden is the quote unquote winner of the selection, and there are a couple of states where the Libertarian Party got a, got a number of votes, which are about, like, okay, I'll just, to avoid phrasing this poorly, I think it's Wisconsin is the one everybody's sharing around. Um, the Libertarian Party got like 58,000 votes. Donald Trump got 2,600,000, and Joe Biden got 2,638,000. So basically, the narrative is that libertarians are the reason that Donald Trump lost the election. And I was talking with Heretic about how I didn't really make any predictions about the selection, but one of the things that it seemed like, because libertarians are sort of getting increasingly close to the point where they're about to undermine all of the state's abilities to all the pillars that allow the state to have influence over society on a systemic level, to hold power over people. Because we're getting increasingly close to that point, and the state is starting to become increasingly insecure about it. Just look at how they're talking about cryptocurrency, for instance. They were going. I suggested that it might have been very convenient for the state if they were going to try and pull this, and in order to try and get one of the groups who identified with a particular party, um, to sort of turn against libertarians in a Hegelian sort of fashion.
that definitely seems to be the case, and there's definitely a very strong case to be made that, like, I think like a week or not a week, a month or two, maybe three before, I don't remember the exact timing, but I made the prediction that this is going to be a disputed election, not just because of Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian Party, but also just because that we're approaching the end of the empire.
And the
We're,
state's
the,
trying, yeah, and the state's trying to make it seem it's trying to make it seem as though your voots actually are influencing what the empire does.
But more importantly, towards the tail end of any civilization, who rules, or rather, every civilization that's parasited upon by a government, you'll see that who actually is in charge of that government is going to be heavily disputed in one way or another. You could, in more dictatorial regimes, this will manifest as protests against the regime and just general civil unrest and disregard or popular disregard for legitimacy of the ruler. And in more, I would say, volatile political regimes, but even then, that's not quite the case, since I don't know if you could characterize democracies as volatile. But what you would see is that there would be disputed elections where the outcome and who won was never going to be entirely clear. You saw this to some sort of extent in the Roman Empire, which, although of course they weren't democratic at all, but towards the tail end of its existence, they were basically having a civil war every week, where senators and emperors would constantly be at war with each other, sending their personal legions to kill each other just so they could make each other emperor and give each other political favors. It was kind of a very common occurrence. Now,
I would characterize the modern state as particularly of the United States and European Union countries as it's an empire characterized by financial manipulation backed up through coercive decree as opposed to just coercive decree outright.
and that's I mean, to a certain extent, democratic elections are and always have been civil wars to a certain extent, or at least a civil war by proxy, because the outcome of an election is meant to simulate what the outcome of a disputed political or what a political dispute would have been had the two factions, or rather two political parties, gone to open warfare with one another, all other things being equal except their population size. So, with this in mind, like we've never really evolved past the Roman Empire's constant civil wars. We just created a more civilized version of it. And so it makes perfect sense that what we would see nowadays is a disputed election where who actually won is not going to be entirely clear. And both sides, well, that is to say, the Republicards and the Demotards, are all going to agree that their candidate is the legitimate winner, and if the other side is either stealing or is going to steal the election. I know, for
Well,
example, that the Trump administration is starting to file lawsuits against the vote counting in several places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, and I don't remember everywhere else, and I'm pretty sure it's going to escalate as time goes on. They're going to try to appeal this to the Supreme Court, which, given what's her name's recent recent addition, is definitely going to rule in the Trump administration's favor. And there's going to be, well, quite a bit of shenanigans going on. And I think this is the optimal outcome, at least from the state's point of view, that you have both sides now equally agreeing that the other side is going to be the other side is equally evil and therefore attempting to, well, create a dispute, and you have a reason for both of them to be out in the streets and for them to for lack of a better term, kill each other. I don't know if this will actually escalate into open warfare, but you're basically going to see a bit of unrest in the not too distant future, especially as this thing drags on. And trust me, it will drag on. It will not stop until the state gets what it wants, which is to say, it needs to keep the lights on. It needs to transition into a position where it's not having to do all sorts of things just to keep the lights on for another 5 minutes.
yeah, and sorry if I was having like a if I was, describing it in a bit of a brainlet fashion earlier, but basically, it looks as though the Libertarian Party, which, by the way, as we've made the case for extensively, is not actually a libertarian organization, despite the name. Libertarianism inherently rejects politics. It's sort of entailed in order to even reach a libertarian conclusion to reject politics. But the Libertarian Party is basically, it's attempting to represent the libertarian philosophy in mainstream politics, because it shares a name, and a lot of people are kind of brainlets in regards to actually explaining their positions or understanding how to distinguish certain principles. And it's becoming the state, the U.S. government at least. It's their version of Emmanuel Goldstein, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Mm-hmm. And with this in mind, we're going to be seeing a lot more election drama as time goes on. I will admit that my original prediction was that Trump was going to win at least after Tuesday, and then there's going to be mail-in ballots that are going to be counted afterwards, and then Biden's going to win, was not accurate. However, my original conclusion is that this is going to be a disputed election was definitely true.
But on the plus side, if assuming that it goes the way that we're thinking that it might, or at least the way that the state is sort of framing it right now, and on the plus side, we get to see Joe Biden's inauguration. He goes up on the stage and he's like, uh, uh I'm happy to see you, boys and girls. He looks into the audience, sees some black people. Hey, Jill, who let the coloreds in here? Get those fucking coloreds out of here.
What I'm
This
expecting
is
what I'm
supposed to be the
expecting
White House.
what I'm expecting to see is he goes up on stage. He's getting ready to accept and inaugurate the election for president of the United States. Thanking goes into something along the lines of, I want to thank every single boy and girl in America for giving me the chance up on the
Defeat
stage.
Richard Nixon.
And I am very happy to welcome the next president of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Oh no.
Yes. God, I honestly I was hoping that it wouldn't be a disputed election simply because I have a preference for things not being on fire. But that said, a Joe Biden presidency was what I was silently rooting for because I mean everyone has to admit that a State of the Union address in 2022, 2023, or 2024 as his dementia progresses would just become hilarious.
I can imagine the meme quote right now. Ellipses. A Joe Biden presidency is what I was low key hoping for. Ellipses. Filthy heretic. November 4th, 2020.
I mean, I've been pretty clear. I don't know if I said it in previous streams, but I've definitely been pretty forward about it on the Discord server that I was rooting for Joe Biden. I wasn't planning on. I didn't vote for him at all. Obviously, I'm pretty certain I actually slept through the entirety when the polls were open. But I was hoping for him because I would think his presidency would just be absolutely freaking hilarious.
Yeah, hoping that he wins is not necessarily the same thing as supporting him on principled grounds, or arguing in favor of a Joe Biden presidency as a way of achieving any sort of social change. It's just yeah, we're just kind of rooting quietly for the memes.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well,
what were you gonna say? Sorry.
nothing. I'm just thinking about all of those people who we talked about before who wanted Joe Biden to win because he'll be a vote for the rule of the. You remember that video from
Yeah,
last Wednesday?
the one we were looking at last Wednesday. Something I was gonna say though is, on the other hand, if any political libertarians are watching, well, the counter economists are now, are still we're extending our hands. And I would have the same message to. Actually, that's one of the plus sides right now is that while while the Trump cultists are absolutely like losing their fucking minds like a robot in a sci-fi movie that was just given a logical paradox and can't fucking figure it out. Um, yeah, we're here, and we would be happy to sell you a gun and network with you around the white market hellscape that would have existed even if Trump had won the presidency.
Oh, speaking of which, weren't you looking at a thread on 4chan poll board?
Well, there's a bunch of threads on fucking 4chan right now.
I was wondering why you gave me the same link multiple times. It wasn't the
Is
same link, and I think I told you already that I hadn't had a chance to open those yet.
Oh, it's the same. Well, they have different titles, but yeah. Poll right now is split between the remaining libertarians, both political and counter economist on there, and the Trump cultists, and it's fun. The libertarians are making like memes of. I think the reference is let me find one to show you. But making like Wojaks wearing mega hats, crying, and Joe Biden, Joe Biden, accompanied with Joe Biden pictures. A lot of them, just Joe Biden colored like Pepe, basically to piss these people off. I think it's hilarious, but fucking, um, but yeah, basically there's a fucking like it's like that scene on Pole right now where like SpongeBob's brain rips in half and there's like a fire. It's like an office building inside of the brain and there's like papers flying everywhere. It's on fire. That's what Pole is like right now.
It's pretty freaking glorious. Now let me just see if I can't. I need to save these pictures first before I can put them on screen for people to look at. But just give me a minute. Just a minute, guys. You'll be able to see what we're looking at shortly. So we're basically all you need to know is that while you're watching the meltdown of Pole in real time, it's absolutely hilarious. They're gonna Yeah, there we go. So yeah, you're seeing the meltdown of the Magatards in real time. It's freaking hilarious. This actually reminds me of what happens after 2016 with what was her name, the Green Party candidate who spent $1 billion
Yeah.
to do a recount.
Jill Stein, you mean?
Yes, that's her. And yeah, that basically amounted to nothing. This is
Somebody made a meme with Happy Roadkill's characters. I don't know if you've seen that artist, but there's some mega brainlet on Twitter that uh makes like those parody Stone Toss comics, but somebody made a pretty great meme with with some of their characters. I just sent it to you.
mhm. Give me a minute here. Oh crap! What did I save it as? Yeah, the problem is that like my pictures folder is so freaking large that it takes forever for it to load a particular picture unless I happen to know what its name is.
Yeah, I remember this narrative in 2016 as well. And the Democrats were not the chosen party for the selection. There was some minor narrative screeching about the Libertarian Party, sort of like this. So basically, the Libertarian Party is there just to get screeched at for like 2 or 3 months.
Hmm.
Um, just to try and stop people from actually looking into libertarianism for a bit and looking for refutations to the state when they become disillusioned.
Mm-hmm. And that's they've just got put the pictures on screen. Yeah, it's pretty much a mirror image. History repeats itself quite frequently, and this is, well, very clear evidence of this. People are going to try to do everything they can to avoid having to confront the fact that the state does not actually work in their interests.
Yeah, don't. I guess some advice I could give is not to not let libertarianism be, be political or be represented by the party, and to introduce people to counter economics, since there are going to be a lot of people in that position for the next couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely disillusioned, which seems to be the case after every election. And that's going to be the time you want to introduce people to counter economics.
Mm-hmm. And I know the person who originally came up with these characters is a Marxist, but I really do appreciate the character design.
Yeah,
It's actually
I
well
got
done.
the actual comics like fucking piss me off, but the characters are well designed. I think that's actually a big part of why it irritates me so much, is because the characters are so well designed, but the artist is like such a brainlet.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like they're kind of like a better version of existential comics.
Yeah, where their art doesn't look like it's done by somebody who smells like a diaper.
Anyways, don't
So
know.
yeah, that the actual getting on to the actual point of the stream, we were just sort of delaying the inevitable, to be honest. But
Kind of, but it's still a pretty interesting topic to talk about nonetheless, and it's also topical because, well, this is what the everyone's going to be talking about, the disputed election. I can guarantee you that we'll be talking about it more as time goes on and things start to escalate, and I'm reasonably sure that it's going to escalate.
oh yeah, for sure. At least a little bit. I don't know how much it's going to escalate, but it's certainly we're gonna see some escalation for sure. And in what sense things are going to escalate, I guess, is another question. But I that's the one thing that I did know for sure before this whole thing happened, is that no matter what happened, there were going to be riots,
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think that was going to be controversial.
because everybody's being constantly told that they need to basically invest their entire lives, all their time and resources, or as much of their time and resources as possible, into shilling for these political parasites, and don't ever actually go out and like work to like make your life more sustainable on your own, network with your neighbors in order to get the things you need, or become self-employed by doing so. Yeah, no, avoid that. Invest all your time and resources into voting or into shilling for the state, and continue working for your white market wage slave job.
Always put your hope and your faith in your politicians because your politicians will save you. And
Yeah,
whatever
you're
side
literally
whatever side of the political partyarchy you go for, just remember that the other side is literally Hitler, and if they're elected, then absolutely the worst things that you could ever possibly imagine are all going to come true,
yeah,
because
Bo
everything your candidate
Jiden.
believes in is perfect, great, and wonderful and good, while everything your opponent believes in is evil, bad, wonderful, or horrible and painful.
Yeah, Bo Jiden is president now. That means he's gonna like he has that Thanos gauntlet. He's gonna snap his fingers, and all your guns are gonna like magically turn into sand. And also, a bunch of fucking brown people are gonna rape your women.
Hmm. I mean, I'm pretty sure all MAGA tards remember that time when Joe Biden said that he was perfectly okay with gun confiscation. He believes that we should just take the guns and have due process second.
Someone should,
Remember,
yeah,
you remember when Joe Biden said that? Oh wait,
yeah,
he
I do.
didn't. He didn't. That was Trump.
They both said it.
What?
Yeah, they both said it though.
Not those words specifically, though. Although they have both admitted that they're basically in favor of gun confiscation. So it's always funny to see those MAGA tards who are saying, "You stupid friggin' libertarians, you voted your gun rights away." Well, I mean, first off, the gun control issue has been settled a long time ago, and by a long time ago, I mean like a couple years ago. So it's
That's just
really a
what I was trying.
non-issue.
That's what I was trying to say though. Somebody should make a meme of like that Veggie Tale scene. Allow us to introduce ourselves, but it's an alliance for the libertarian left ball, an agorist ball, and an ANCAP ball on the side.
Hmm. Let me see if I can't. I'll probably end up making that as the stream goes on.
I'd love to see that, but anyway, I guess enough delaying the inevitable. So the current project that I've been working on is a response video. Well, it's not a response video. It's a series that I've called Breadlets. I've teased this for a couple months now, but I've had other projects in the works, so I wasn't really able to get around to it. But yeah, so now I'm working on it, and what Breadlets is a series where I review breadtube channels. Breadtube being sort of an informal community of essayists who make content about social issues, politics, and econ from a Marxist perspective. And yeah, Breadlit's episode 1 is going to be on a user by the name of Vicky1999 now, and that's sort of I've been sort of working on this for 5 days, and I have about a page of my essay done. And the reason why I am having a very difficult time working on it is because holy shit, Vicky's content is bad. Like I have a very hard time even explaining how bad it is. So yeah, we instead of trying to in the so that I don't have to explain myself, at least I don't have to center my explanation around a written framing device. I can just use clips from this stream in that section of the Breadlets video, which yeah, to take a few steps back, this stream is going to be dedicated to doing live responses to 3 of Vicky's videos. Probably not going to be going through the last one because it's 41 minutes long, but first one is, but it's a voluntary system, right?
No.
Referring
That's the other video. This video is the market will keep growing forever, right?
I thought we were going from bottom up in the order that we were responding to them in.
I don't. I mean, sure we can
Doesn't
do
it
that,
doesn't
but
matter honestly, but yeah, these are gonna be some of the videos that I talk about in that Breadlets episode. I guess a short summary of who Vicky is. I'll be going over it in greater detail in the Breadlets episode, but imagine if one of those like really cringy, toxic leftist Twitter accounts, you know the ones, the anime account icon, the bio is filled with just like a list of the mental illnesses they claim to have, and they post hot takes on like an almost daily basis that like make you cringe at how stupid they are. Imagine if one of those people had a YouTube channel. That's what we're dealing with today.
All right. Now, I don't really think there's much more to say about it. I did give the suggestion to him when we were talking, I think a couple days ago. Don't remember the exact date, but he told me how painful it was to sit through these. And having done response videos to Marxoids in the past, I had a pretty good idea, and I just thought, hey, it might actually be a bit more fun if had someone to watch it with. So yeah, so
It's
should we
telling
hit
you
play?
right now, you're not fucking ready for this if you think that if you think that you're just going into like Marxist hot takes. Like these will like if you don't take if you don't pause for a bit, these will fucking melt your skin off. They're so radioactive.
All right, well, I'm ready. Let's begin.
Yeah.
That is why the free market is the best system. Free market is the best system there can be. It has lifted millions of people out of poverty and created unimaginable wealth for everyone. And in the future,
we're not even 5 seconds in. We already got a lot of things we already have a lot of things to talk about.
What the hell? Why did it jump like that?
Well, this is a different site because Watch Together wasn't working, but yeah. So free market system. That's the first thing that we need to go over, and we also got to go over the way that this is framed. Being a podium, it's not really explicitly made clear whether or not this is a politician, but typically people on podiums are in positions of privilege or are given preferential treatment in the media or platform algorithm similar to Vicky's channel. This character here in a lot of their essays, first thing that we got to talk about is sort of the way that these are framed. And this is not unique to Vicky's channel, but a lot of the BreadTube channels will do this where they don't actually respond. Most of their essays or most of their videos aren't hold on a minute. But yeah, a lot of these channels frame their essays or frame their responses to arguments around things that people have never actually said, and they're able to do this using cartoon puppets or just using stills of characters that they've drawn to represent their opponents. Typically this it comes off as a framing device, but it's actually a very manipulative rhetorical tactic because it allows them to appear to be responding to their opponent's position while able to control how they frame their argument and what their opposition's actually saying. It's not actually a representation of it's a construct of their own design. It's not actually a representation of their opponent's position. And Vicky takes advantage of this to the point where even people who aren't knowledgeable of that tactic will probably notice it. For instance, you don't see ANCAP personalities typically characterizing their argument as a defense of the free market system. That's more like that's more of like a conservative statist talking point. How they would characterize the policy decrees of whatever state that they're trying to argue positively for. Another way in which this is sort of immediately obvious is that Vicky uses this sort of ANCAP blue-shirted character to basically represent the views of anyone that's not a Marxist, which I don't know if they genuinely believe that or not, that anyone who's not a Marxist basically has the same views on everything in the realm of social organization, from how to study markets to how to characterize their principles to what their principles are. But this is one of the first things that stood out to me when I tried watching their content, and there's going to be in this video particularly, because they attempt to characterize all the arguments for markets that they're refuting in the ANCAP under the ANCAP position, that it's led to them basically making this video where the ANCAP character is defending the Keynesian multiplier argument.
Well, I mean, there's a very easy way to figure out if what they're trying to do is conflate all arguments or any vaguely non-Marxoid arguments together into a single meaningless amalgam, is to just simply, well, how often did they use the term neoliberal?
They have a couple videos with that word and that key phrase in the title, so...
Oh, there you go. That's your explanation. Which is something I pointed out in the previous video or in my neoliberal video, where people who tend to use that phrase, the phrase doesn't actually describe any philosophies whatsoever, and it's only useful in terms of being able to marginalize people. That's literally its only purpose. But what it also does is that it allows people to assume that they're refuting an actual philosophical point when all they're really doing is just putting together or just amalgamating together a whole bunch of different, completely contradictory ideas. Even incoherent statist ideas are amalgamated into actual libertarian ones, and in the end, it just becomes this incoherent mess. So when you frame all of your opponents, all of the non-Marxists, as neoliberals, it becomes very easy to just like lump Keynesians and Austrians together into a single package without actually having to understand the nuance and difference in terms of what their actual belief system is. He's basically constructed a straw man in his own mind. And he's not even like consciously setting one up to make his opponents look.
Something that I guess people who are watching are, gonna get, I guess this is basically going to be an early version of that essay in some regards. But that's actually a point I was intending on making in the video, that there are some things that lead me to believe that it's not intentionally intellectually dishonest in some regards. In some regards, it's just that Vicky genuinely is a brainlet that doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about. But for instance, in another video, one of the other ones that we're going to be responding to tonight, this isn't much of a spoiler because frankly it's like 20 minutes in and we're probably not even going to get to that part. But
40 actually.
There's a section where responding to one of my earlier videos where I explained time preference. This wouldn't have been at the point where I had developed sort of my left Rothbardian views yet, but I still understood, I still was at the point where I understood time preference, and I gave a very basic explanation of it. And in the context of the video, it was an attempt to sort of explain how firms might be competitive in the current in the model that dominates the political economy in modernity. Although, to clarify, I've since taken sort of like the pure Byland view that that firms that dominate the political economy, the sort of hierarchical business model, they largely exist because of artificial scarcity created by the state and certain types of intervention which privilege them at the expense of their competitors by allowing them to externalize their maintenance costs through things like tax subsidies or tax cuts and types of deregulation, or like limited liability standards and artificial property claims that are defended by the state that allow them to defend more than what they would be able to naturally homestead. So my argument still stands. I characterized time preference accurately. Their reply was something along the lines of, "That's not how capitalism works. Something surplus value, and because surplus value, you can't actually, like, you give up. They make it very clear they do not actually understand the concept of time preference, like, at all. They can't get past the Marxist blinders. They can't understand that it's not attempting to conform to Marx's explanation. It is attempting to provide a competing explanation. And that seems to be where Vicky hits his roadblock, at least when he's trying to represent opposing arguments, because his attempts to respond to competing economic methodologies are always from the perspective of Marxism. It's very clear he's never asked the question, well, why is Marx right? Marx provided an explanation, but does that stand up to scrutiny? What about his theory about equal exchange rates contradicting the socially necessary labor value? What about the problem of socially necessary labor value just turning his theory of value into a circular argument?
If I'm quiet, yeah, sorry. If I'm quiet, it's because I'm working on that meme right now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
But
it's pretty close to. Yeah, I was just gonna say it's getting pretty close to done. But yeah, I'll share. I'll both share, just so my silence is worthwhile to the audience. I am going to share it on stream, and of course, because you can't actually see what people are seeing on the stream, I'm going to also share it to you on DM. So yeah. So
then
anyways,
also, yeah, let's continue, because I was about to talk about something that comes up later in this video.
All right, I actually jumped back a little bit.
Free market is the best system there can be. It has lifted millions of people out of poverty and created unimaginable wealth for everyone. And in the future we will all get to enjoy these new things, which for now only get enjoyed by the rich. Because the market will grow even further, which will make everything cheaper.
Yeah, that's a straw man argument. I mean, first of all, I don't even think I even really addressed the whole free market system. Austrians don't characterize their view of the market as a system. In fact, that's kind of their point. The entire point of their their methodology is to refute the idea that you can construct these sort of prescriptive models where rates of interest, for instance, or the supply of commodities enter the market under this fixed way, and you can incentivize or disincentivize certain behaviors, and that that this is a sustainable or even desirable. It's not that it's some will argue based on sustainability, but more commonly, from the Austrian perspective, it's a matter of this isn't sustainable, because when you create the impression that these resources exist when they actually don't, because that's what's actually happening when you attempt to prescribe the supply of certain resources into the market, and who gets first access to them. By cardinalizing the way in which these resources enter the market and trying to prescribe what the market is, by sort of creating these legislative decrees that incentivize people to operate with certain firms and with the state. What you're doing when you do this is you're either creating the impression that resources have been produced which don't actually exist, or you are limiting the availability of resources to where people have to allocate their resources to things that people don't actually want. So you're either going to create a scarcity of the things that people actually would find to be in their most highly valued preferences, and that's how you get things like sweatshops and an increasing homeless problem, or you get an abundance and you get people spending money on things that don't actually exist. In either way, that's going to lead to a crisis. It's because it runs contradictory to how essentially social organization it is observed in nature. But Vicky is not able. That's not even really getting into the nuances of the Austrian methodology. That's just what sets it apart from the positions that would characterize, the market as a system. To Austrians, the market is not a system, which is prescribed by the state or any other institution. To the Austrians, doing such a thing is pseudoscience.
Yeah, don't really have much to add because, as I said, I'm finishing this thing up. So should we continue?
I guess this is sort of the problem, or one of the problems with Vicky's videos, is that like every 5 seconds, there are like 10 different things that you have to respond to, or something that he doesn't understand that requires like 5 minutes to go over. So it's very difficult to get through a full video of his. But another thing you'll notice, I guess, as well, to keep this short, is that he has a sort of gish gallopy rhetorical style. For those who don't know, gish galloping is it's a tactic where you just read off of your script, or you make your argument, and you speak very quickly in order to try and overload the person you're talking to and make it less likely that they'll be able to respond or to be able to pick up on maybe some dishonest, sly framing tricks that you use to assume things that aren't justified, or to steer people into a direction of thinking through question begging, or by using emotionally manipulative word choices. And as much as he hates Ben Shapiro, it's exactly what Ben Shapiro does. Ben Shapiro is a figure that's quite, he's one of the memes about Ben Shapiro is that he uses that tactic. He speaks very quickly and makes a lot of arguments that don't really logically follow from one another in quick succession.
All right. And by the way, I finished the meme. I'm sending it to you right now.
All right. I love it.
Yeah, I just posted it on screen for people to check out themselves.
I'm glad that you didn't. I'm glad in hindsight you didn't include the ANCAP ball into that meme, because, yeah, the ANCAPs are sort of neutral on whether or not they consider what their praxis is, and the ALL and the Agorists essentially argue that that the libertarian ends a free society is the result of a libertarian praxis. So in reality, in terms of anything that could be called direct action, that's really all libertarians should be focused on. How to arrive at our ends. We know what our ends are. We can characterize our ends. We can explain why they're right. But explaining why we're right is not going to stop a cop from fucking aggressing against us anyway. The way to achieve those ends are by subverting the ability for authoritarian institutions to exist.
Hmm.
Anyway, let's continue.
Yep, just a minute.
And then there's a crisis. But that's just the natural cleaning process. The bad businesses get destroyed and the good ones continue. No reason to panic. Any questions? Yes, I have
Yeah,
one. You stay.
I don't think I have to spend a whole lot of time going over this, but basically they just described the
The,
boom bust cycle, the way that Vicky attempted to characterize the boom bust cycle um was, well, that's just bad businesses going under.
yeah, because
And
all businesses go under at roughly the same time.
And as I noted previously, the business cycle, at least according to the Austrians, is itself a problem caused by planning and attempts to create these sort of prescriptive top-down models.
And that's of course the boom bust cycle is what happens when your money is controlled by the states, specifically the central banks, because you basically allow them to unilaterally determine what the value of money is going to be through central banking, and that's going to determine people's spending and saving habits, particularly in large businesses. So this is why you see a lot of malinvestment build up during times of boom, and that's also why you have recessions, because once the actual value of the money is understood, as opposed to the artificial central planned value of money determined through the Federal Reserve, then you're going to have a lot of people realizing that their malinvestments were malinvestments at roughly the same time. A lot of the plans that they made, the money they already spent fulfilling those plans, aren't actually going to come to fruition. And a lot of businesses have to eat that cost. A lot of plans that they previously made are now put on hold. A lot of investments that might have otherwise existed, research and development, all that has to stop. And that happens roughly at the same time, which is, well, why recessions occur. So it makes complete sense, at least to me, that that would happen. However, to characterize this as something that's just inherent to marketplaces is, well, rather ludicrous. This We didn't really have a boom bust cycle prior to the Federal Reserve, and the ones that did happen, well, there were can always be characterized as a result of government, or can always be identified as being either non-existent, as in the case of the so-called tulip panic of the 17th century, or the or just simply a result of some other government policy. Like I believe there was some thing on silver in the 1890s. I don't quite remember that one.
Um, yeah, I'm not entirely sure about that either, but yeah, the other thing that this sort of insinuates is that planned economies don't have these sorts of cycles, and for a large part, for the most part, that's, I guess, sort of true, because you can't be in a bust cycle if you can't be in a boom bust cycle if you're always in a bust cycle. but But yeah, this sort of problem was especially prolific under, Vicky's favorite regime to shill for, which appears to be the Soviet Union, if you take a look at their channel.
Oh,
Um, just to the point where, counter economists, that's an example of a modern regime which was subverted by counter economists like yours truly, and, like, I guess, heretics truly, for lack of a
mhm.
better way of putting it. By 1991, the Soviets' own Politburo was estimating that, like, 4 to 5 times of the resources that were actually being produced in the Soviet Union were being produced under the table.
Yeah, that seems about right. I mean, I don't have I haven't looked at those statistics, and honestly, I've been having a little trouble finding them. But I can easily see
Sure.
that being the case, especially given, like, I think I've talked about before on the stream that around the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was a huge black market in the Soviet Union for American-made music. and
Yeah.
the various times that the Kremlin attempted to crack down on the black market, the black market brought the Kremlin to its knees repeatedly, over and over again. If you don't think that the black market is a superpower,
I would definitely I'm interested in seeing how Marxists deal with it when it eventually gets to the point where they're sort of unavoidably what the libertarian movement is made of. It's not people like Hoppe. It's people like the cypherpunks, and
Stated that the market will
he characterizes the Austrian position as though they're arguing the market will keep growing, which is just, you may recognize it. The more well-read of our viewers may recognize that that's the Malthus trap. It treats the market as though it's something that's independent from actual human action, and it was refuted back, even like I think David Ricardo even refuted this in great detail. And yeah, Marx had to pretend it was true, even though the classical economists, they provided a pretty swift rebuttal to it. But yeah, there's that's the first problem with it, or at least it's sort of absurd on its face when you understand it as the as the modern market. Not I'm not referring to modern monetary theory, but like as modern market theorists would look at it. Because the market is just, as I noted earlier, as it's understood by the Austrians and as it's understood by even the Marxists would argue this. It's just people, and you would have to be kind of insane not to recognize that it's the market is supposed to be a study of people actually exchanging resources. And I don't really I don't really know how much more I could simplify. It's why I'm kind of having trouble here. Yeah, obviously the Austrians do not argue that position. The Austrians, in fact, I don't really even really know, um, I don't even really know what like this is supposed to be a representation, like, straw man of. I think this is just something they made up. This doesn't even resemble anything that the Austrians would argue.
I mean, we've already identified that earlier in the stream that he's not responding to Austrians. He's responding to a formless amalgamation of non-Marxist opinions. Basically, he's responding to neoliberals, and of course, because neoliberalism doesn't actually exist, he's basically responding to an idea that he believes other people actually have in his own mind. In fact, I don't even think Keynesians believe in infinite growth forever or argue for it. They definitely don't argue for it because I've never seen anyone unironically argue in favor of it, and I don't. And the only people that ever bring it up are, well, Marxoids and people who do subscribe to some variation of Malthusianism. So I don't believe that this is a position that actually exists. I'm pretty sure this is something that he probably heard about in his own echo chamber. Maybe, I don't know, Vosh
No,
brought it up or some other pedophile, and as a result, he kind of felt obligated to make a video responding to it.
the argument is the closest thing that this even resembles in the study of markets is just the notion that people exchanging with one another are always exchanging in pursuit of their most highly valued preferences. Although mainstream economists would characterize that they wouldn't that's a strictly praxeologue way of putting it, because mainstream economists look at it, they attempt to put forward something called Cardinal Utility, or well, they won't ever characterize it that way, but basically they attempt to formulate utility on a graph as though it's something you can observe in a material sense. That's something monetarists and neoclassicals do, and that's basically their way of trying to band-aid the political economic models while simultaneously accepting the theory of marginal utility. But basically, it's understood that wealth is just expanding the way people use their resources and allowing more people to obtain more access to resources. And this is sort of, the Marxists argue from the Malthus trap, because they argue for the falling rate of profit, which is, it's something that Engels, after Marx died, even had to distance himself from, because it was basically, as the falling rate of profit is supposed to be argued. Say the intrinsic value for a cheeseburger is $3. Already we can see some problems here, but stay with me. For those who aren't familiar, just the falling rate of profit is that the market rate, competitive market rate, is $5. In order to undermine, in order to undermine competitors, they have to constantly lower the market price closer to the intrinsic value of the burger, and eventually they're not going to be able to make profit from it anymore. Yeah, they argue for this position. It's critical to Marx's interpretation of history, the material dialectic specifically. How did Marxists get around that? Well, they introduced, of course, the. I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. But yeah, the way that they got around this was basically Leninism, or at least what's more commonly referred to as Leninism. So instead of it being a scientific process, which will naturally happen, instead, we're going to make it happen through the force of the state.
Pretty much. And you can very, very much see what the problem is right away. Like the moment that it's introduced that there is some sort of intrinsic value in things, you know that, well, something's going terribly wrong. And I'm looking at the comments right now. E.G. Gray says that he warns their family about neo-libs because they know that he's a lib. I don't know what lib refers to libertarian, like neo-libertarian. I don't even know if that's a thing. Or if you're a liberal. And we need some clarification on that.
But yeah, needless to say, literally nobody other than Marxists talks about markets this way, as something external to society, which grow, and because they grow, people are just sort of given more things.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, let's continue.
Do the common people enjoy new technology then? Thank you. The market does not stop growing. Economic growth is an exponential function, which means that it grows faster and faster every year. There are many examples of this in nature, like bacteria. They grow exponentially. The market is just as natural, and because of that, it follows the natural laws of expansion. But actually, bacteria don't.
Yeah, this is like literally no one has ever argued this before.
I'm trying to think of all the people. Like, I've been talking to people about politics and political stuff for probably 12 years now. I've never heard this argument ever. I've never articulated this argument ever.
I'll take shit no one ever said for 500, Alex.
I mean, people do say that markets are natural, and there's a decent case to be, and there's a pretty good case to be made for that. However, no one says that markets just grow exponentially, or that markets are like bacteria and that they grow exponentially. I don't even know if there's biologists or people who are even amateur biologists who say that bacteria grow exponentially, since naturally they're going to be constrained by the kind of resources that they need to, produce additional bacteria.
Also, within the study of markets, there are different ideas of like what a market is, or when we're not just people who actually study markets. I think it's safe to like exclude Vicky from the category of people who study markets because he's just sort of making shit up. But people who actually study markets, or at least the Austrians. The Austrians don't treat every market as though it's the same, and some monetarists and neoclassicals would, they would argue as though they don't. However, it's very difficult for them to make the case that that there are different markets because again, they're operating from the presumption that you can sort of prescribe you can sort of prescribe economies onto a society, which would imply that markets are sort of a thing that are made up by the government. But no, every street has a different market. Every house has a different market or economy, however you prefer to characterize it. Every town has a different market, and because every one of these communities has different environments that impact the people living in them differently and influence their sort of incentives or how they inform their view of their own preferences. You have to treat them differently, which means you have to observe them differently. And this is something that mainstream econ can't take into consideration. But this is another problem with treating the market as some ubiquitous alien that just kind of exists over the entire world. It's just completely detached from reality any way that you look at it.
So long as there are two people on the planet, there is going to be an economy. Crusoe's Island is going to be a pretty good example where you have two different people who, presuming they don't think and act exactly alike, are going to have different preferences, are going to have different specializations, are going to have different interests in different things that they want to eventually specialize in if they don't already have the skill. Naturally, this is going to result in some form of exchange happening, either because one produces goods and services the other wants. That is going to be an economy. So yeah, I'm just reinforcing the point, and just to go back to what I was talking about in the comments, because Ishii Gray did clarify, yes, he means libertarian. He says that he hates the so-called neolibs exist. I'm actually not sure what that means, but neoliberals don't exist, and neolibertarian, I never heard that term before, so
Or
I
I
don't
think
even
you
know
might
if
be
that's a.
referring to. I think you might be referring to so-called neoliberals. Yeah, I guess even if I understood what you were trying to say to us, I guess I would need to clarify what you even are referring to. Like, are your parents? Because the thing that I've noticed with either conservative or like libtard status is that they seem to have a different idea of what neoliberalism is, because every different person seems to have a different idea, because even the academics who talk about neoliberalism admit that it doesn't really mean anything,
Mhm.
or can't mean anything.
I mean, they don't even know what it's supposed to be, let alone what it means.
It's a catch-all term that's used to refer to any concept or principle that they don't like, I guess.
I mean,
Anyway.
from what I gather, it's basically a umbrella term to characterize every single vaguely state skeptic idea that could possibly ever exist, including the statist ones, which is how you get all sorts of nonsense like the neoclassical, the Chicago and the Austrian schools all being lumped into the same umbrella, despite their vastly differing ideas. And
How you
also how you
get
get
things-
shenanigans about how protectionists and so-called free trade statists can all be characterized as neoliberals.
how you get things like ANCAPs arguing that the market is like bacteria.
Mhm.
What the fuck? It's like I could just sort of picture as I'm talking my avatar saying that, and there being like question marks appearing over his head. Because yeah, I fucking even just saying that to myself, it makes less sense.
It just doesn't.
But
Anyways, I'm just gonna let's see how
yeah,
let's see how his let's see how his self insert responds to the straw man of his own imagination.
Grow exponentially forever. If they did that, the whole universe would be covered in bacteria. It actually follows a logistic growth, which means that at first it grows exponentially, but eventually it slows down as it reaches the carrying capacity. That means at some point bacteria stop growing because they've infected the whole host or filled the entire petri dish. Exponential growth doesn't actually exist in nature at all because all growth is limited by something. Well, of course, my example was just a simile to make the growth more understandable. The free market is not bound by the laws of nature because it's man-made. There is no upper limit to the amount of money that can be produced, which means that there is no limit to the amount of growth that can happen. But what
I'm sorry.
You can't see me, but my mouth is agape because I'm processing. I got those little spinny dots in going around my head.
Yeah, it's apparently ANCAP Keynesianism is a thing because it's the ANCAP character basically making the money multiplier argument.
Uh, 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 I don't even know where to begin. Well, I mean, first off, we know
This is
these.
the
We
type of
clearly
shit
see that
that
he's trying to. We know that he's trying to set up a contradiction in his strawman argument when he's saying that markets are both man-made and they're natural simultaneously, which is clearly a contradiction. But it's also I mean, it's also not a contradiction in a sense because just because something is man-made doesn't mean it's not natural.
literally by definition that well I guess by nature I'm struggling for the way of putting it that would make something natural because you know man came from nature.
I mean, that would theoretically mean like if something is like forget man-made, let's use the term artificial. If the term artificial and natural are a true dichotomy and one cannot be both artificial and natural, and if you define artificial as man-made, then literally any human that has ever existed is artificial. So congratulations,
Human natural.
we had an AI Grey Goo event since the beginning of mankind's history. We are a Grey Goo event.
But yeah, I think literally even like this is an I guess it's an attempt to ascribe the money multiplier argument to the ANCAP character, and I'm aware that there are like some people who claim to be monetarists that call themselves ANCAPs, but you know, for the sake of this, I'm just going to assume he's referring to Austrians as well as all the other market theorists because he seems to be talking about broken versions of all of their arguments and then some stuff that he just made up as well. But yeah, I think even Keynesians they have the caveat of like uh, money should be taken out of the market. However, that's supposed to work. But but yeah, attempting to ascribe this to Austrians is fucking absurd.
Well, that's why that he. This is why that we've identified earlier in the stream that he's not responding to Austrians. He's responding to neoliberals, or rather, his imagined idea for what a neoliberal would actually say and what they would think. Since it goes without
Uh,
saying that no one would actually think this because there aren't any actual neoliberals.
TLDR, shut the fuck up. You don't know what Austrians actually argue.
You don't know. You don't even know what. You don't even know what non. You don't even know what neoliberals think.
Well, I don't know what neoliberals think,
I'm
but
I'm responding directly to Vicky.
no one does.
No one does. That's the point. Anyways, should we continue here?
Considering that the Austrian methodology is it's a school of thought which has actually coherent, definable principles and an idea of how you're supposed to, approach studying markets as a science. Um, I long story short, you don't know what you very clearly do not know what the Austrians argue.
No, definitely don't. Anyway, should I continue?
All right.
About resources. There is only a limited amount of, let's say, germanium. It's used to make transistors for electronics and it's on the list of endangered elements, which means it could run out in the near future. The same is true for lithium. There isn't even enough of it around for everyone in the world to get an electric car. Don't the limited resources of the planet mean that the market eventually has to stop growing? Yes, it would seem this way, but the beauty of the free market is that it solves such problems on its own. If Earth runs out of, let's say, lithium, we can just mine asteroids for it. There are single asteroids in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter that contain more lithium than all of Earth. If we run out of resources here, we must simply expand beyond our planet.
As I was saying earlier, this is just a very broken version of how actual people who actually study markets would characterize wealth creation and how wealth comes into being. We're not literally arguing, or we never were arguing in the first place that that resources are material, tangible things. Resources can, this is why it's very important to understand um, marginal utility, because wealth can be resources being used with less input being required in order to actually maintain said resources coming into existence, which are more useful. They have more utility for a broader number of specialities. It's not literally like resources are not the same thing as like material objects. Obviously, there are resources that aren't even material. There are entire like virtual economies, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And and you can't get around that by saying, well, the computer and its components are material. No, what's actually being traded, it exists inside of virtual programs, though, like RuneScape Gold, for instance, being prominent in some Venezuela, for it being common for people to mine in Venezuela and then sell in the gray market, i.e., to people playing the game on trader websites.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention that in terms of resource exhaustion, this is arguably a problem that could be characterized. I mean, I shouldn't put any euphemisms before that. It's caused by the state, not only in the so far as its restriction has regressed and slowed down technological development. It might have otherwise allowed asteroid mining to continue, but it has also prevented the development of alternative technologies that could replace lithium entirely, make it so that it's not as useful, and there might be some cheaper alternative to lithium. I'm not entirely clear on how it's used in electronics. I'm sure there's a good reason for it, but I see no reason why some device can't be developed that is able to not use lithium at all and able to accomplish the same function. It may not be as uh, it may not be as cheap as lithium, but if lithium scarcity does continue to develop as a problem, then what will end up happening is that the price of lithium will increase, and the marginal value of that lithium alternative will become a lot more useful, and as a result, it'll overtake lithium. Not to
Oh, yeah,
mention not to mention in terms of sheer resource amounts, like we haven't exhausted all of the deposits on Earth by any means. The deepest holes in the Earth right now only go down to like a mile or two, and mines don't even go much deeper than that. To say nothing of all the huge resource deposits that exist in the Earth's mantle as well as close to the core. So, in terms of the amount of resources that do exist on Earth, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. Asteroid mining is definitely a very viable and very possible method to gaining additional resources, to say nothing of the freaking Oort cloud.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even get into that. That's a problem with Vicky's content, is it seems like every sentence is so full of shit that it's kind of difficult to even know where to begin or even really figure out the extent to which you actually need to respond to the argument. But yeah, that's sort of why the implications of the state onto society is so important, and it's why Austrians in particular draw a lot of their ire, towards the states. That's one of the most devastating implications of the state's intervention, as I sort of alluded to from the um, not necessarily the libertarian anarchist perspective, but just the Austrian perspective, which nicely complements the libertarian perspective. But um, yeah, one of the most devastating things about the state trying to prescribe these economies by sort of engineering these incentives with an artificial scarcity of resources, and by allowing firms to scale upwards more so than they would otherwise be able to, is that specifically it makes it so people are reduced to using their resources within the legal framework in an increasingly scarce number of ways, an increasingly limited number of ways. That leaves people to the position where we're at currently, where for a lot of people, at least if fresh out of high school, just for example, it is an option to network counter economically. But considering that the infrastructure the state's created actively tries to combat those people, and actively platforms and promotes the state's political partners, and the political partners the state um, has consequently they have a greater amount of bargaining leverage over pretty much anybody, um, because of the limited competition to their model that exists. Most people usually only have the option of wage slavery for McDonald's or wage slavery for Walmart. So this is, to some, responding to one of the other videos, I guess, that we might be getting to later. Honestly, the stream's been going on for an hour and a half, so I don't even know. But yeah, to respond to the "is the market voluntary" question, in a political framework, not necessarily, but hey, that's why we need to undermine its influence over society with the use of counter economics. But that's where the Marxian types go wrong, is by assuming that what we have is a product of the market existing, which is another way in which the Marxist interpretation of history is tautological. The state exists to protect the interests of private industry, but also private property is a construct of the state and requires the state to exist.
All right. Anyways, let's continue.
Isn't space travel the most expensive planet? But isn't space travel the most expensive industry there is? Doesn't it cost like $7,000 to put 1 kilogram into space? And that's just the low Earth orbit, not talking about the asteroid belt. How would you get a whole mining operation up there without creating more cost than value?
More cost than value. Can we if you're gonna like create a straw man, can you at least pretend that this is a conversation that would actually happen?
No. I mean, here's the thing about trying to create these kinds of conversations with yourself, and that is you really have to have a nuanced understanding of the other person's position, because otherwise it just comes off as propaganda, even for people who do agree with Vicky on absolutely everything. I mean, the only reason that this would even come off as appealing is because the person who is watching that video actually knows nothing. Not from a Socratic sense, but just in the sense that they don't actually know anything about basic economics, about
Basic
how
economics.
about social organization, even just like basic concepts.
And long story short, if a Marxist were to present that argument to an Austrian, which most of the time, at least actually, I'd say pretty much any time I've ever argued with a Marxist where I've identified myself as an Austrian beforehand, this is not even remotely close to how it sounds. It sounds something a lot closer to "re," but yeah, if this question were actually presented to an Austrian, the first thing that the Austrian would probably respond with is, "You don't seem to understand the difference between price and value and the nuance of the two."
hmm
Also, they'd be like, "LOL, you believe in intrinsic value."
hmm And in terms of the cost of space travel, well, I mean, we got a few ideas. I'm not going to say much more than that. But I'm just going to say that the current cost of technology is very high, but doesn't need to be that high. So,
Yeah,
anyways, should we continue?
you could just apply the same thing that we were talking about earlier with markets in general to the space industry. The fact that it's thought of as an industry sort of itself should hint at, the fact that there's some sort of political manipulation going on.
Well,
Uh, yeah,
there
the space,
is.
yeah, SpaceX and the other players in that market are not. They're not in that position just because it's impossible to compete with them for some unknown reason. That's another thing these like Marxist protectionist types never really seem to explain is how exactly would you if there is a market actor that is enjoying a privileged position naturally, like how would they ever be in that position in a market framework where, in the absence of any sort of state intervention, someone else could just come in and like undercut them, subvert their operation.
Well, I mean, you can't have that because otherwise they might get a monopoly. You
Oh
can't have
no.
competition because otherwise there might be monopolies.
All
That's
right, let's continue. Yeah, and that's seriously a basis I've heard for the state making antitrust claims.
Market is solving this as we speak. SpaceX is making it possible to launch probes for as little as 1.7 thousand US dollar per kilogram. But that's still way too high to be profitable, considering that any spacecraft would have to be 90% fuel to get to the asteroid belt and be able to return to the Earth with the resources it mined.
And also, even if market prices worked the way that Vicky is claiming that they would, um, the profit from investment would be high enough if like we literally ran out of lithium or ran out of resources to make electronics with. Before going to the asteroids, the potential profit would outweigh the risk. So I think like even according to their own straw man, their argument doesn't even really work.
Well, they're presenting this argument as though the straw man and Vicky's self-insert, they're both agreeing on the premise that value is some fixed amount based on whatever resource there is, and anything that's under that fixed amount is therefore unprofit, or any revenue that's acquired from selling that good under that fixed amount is therefore going to be unprofitable. And their
Yeah,
belief is
there's
therefore
no
their belief is that scarcity therefore isn't really much of an issue. It doesn't factor at all into value.
even if there was like literally no lithium on Earth, which by the way, even if we just got to a point where we were like, can't use anything other than lithium, guess the human race is doomed. Even if we got to that point, people would be scrapping it out of older electronics, or people would be. But just aside from that, so we would never actually really get to the point where there's none. It would just be really scarce. But the fact that it's scarce would mean, that the price goes way the fuck up. So, um, even if it was really costly to invest in mining in space, wouldn't that just wouldn't that mean that that it becomes profitable to invest that way? Even it's kind of breaking my brain to think about the market the way that Vicky's attempting
You
to
are going to
argue
need a
that it
ton of
function
alcohol to
that
get through
Oh
Vicky's
crap!
market
content.
incentive
Get
is
the
Hold
functional.
expensive
on.
stuff.
Sorry, we just got a donation from Kojal for $100.
Ooh,
Yeah,
nice, thanks, man.
like damn, like thanks, man. Yeah, that's
But it is
definitely going to be yeah, that's definitely going to help and definitely help
quite a
us
bit.
give us the motivation we need to get through this freaking video because like god damn, like that's yeah,
But
thanks
did
again, man.
the donation say anything, or?
Yeah, he said you were going to need a ton of alcohol to get through Vicky's content. Get the expensive stuff.
I don't even drink, but yeah, you're probably right.
I should probably get something to drink, except I don't remember where right. Oh, there it is. Yeah, I need to. I would. It takes like a minute for me to prepare something anyway. So yeah, let's just keep going, and we'll probably. I don't know. Do we want to take a 5-minute break shortly?
Sure, we're probably gonna need it. Holy shit.
Yeah. So, anyways, I think we should continue.
Let's
Yes, but
continue.
SpaceX is making it more and more affordable every year. Soon we will be flying to space for less than we're flying to the Bahamas, and that will make an interplanetary expansion of the free market possible and profitable. But don't these rockets all use methane engines? Don't they completely destroy the environment and use fossil fuels? Ignoring the environment.
Oh my god.
What happens?
What?
He's making the not only is he making the externalities argument, but he's like he's talking about greenhouse gases, which we talked about in previous streams before. Now he's trying to appeal to carbon rationing statism.
Yeah, let's. I kind of want. I don't want to comment any further. I kind of just want to see where it goes. Let's see what the straw man has to say.
If we run out of methane? What happens if we run out of methane? Won't rocket launches become way more expensive again?
Yeah, I guess we're just gonna try and build up to this, but yeah, I'm legitimately curious to how Vicky thinks that the ANCAP straw man would respond, because not to spoil things, but Austrians and libertarians do actually have a response to the externalities argument, but I've heard like legitimate intellectuals, or people who actually do have some chops to the arguments that they've put forward, like David Graeber or Noam Chomsky, struggle with this one.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, continuing, just to build up the argument.
Yes, you would assume that, but there are actually biofuels being developed which would make the fuel cheaper than ever. But doesn't biofuel take way
His response to what is clearly an externalities argument is just that there might be alternatives are being developed. I mean, it's true, but it doesn't really address the problems with the argument as it's being presented, and doesn't even take into account like the rather ridiculous claim that like what is it, methane is going to become more scarce. Isn't like don't isn't methane a byproduct of certain forms of industry?
Yeah, it is.
So isn't this exactly or isn't this a perfect example of an argument that we made when we responded to a climate change alarmist video, which is that byproducts of industry that are being referred to as greenhouse gases are simply forms of, or are simply products that have not been commercialized yet? Wouldn't the use of methane as an industrial byproduct being used for space exploration or as fuel for space exploration be a perfect example of that? So doesn't that just completely undermine the climate change alarmist argument completely?
Yeah, I mean that's not even really the extent of the rebuttal to the climate alarmist argument. I don't know. It's just kind of funny to watch Vicky wrap his mind around this because I don't even think honestly Vicky understands like the externalities argument as proponents of the argument would attempt to put forward based on the way that he's representing it here. I don't even think he understands his own argument.
No, and I'm pretty sure he's going to completely gloss over the attempt at the greenhouse gases remark that he made earlier. So, just hitting continue.
More labor and time to be able to be used. Won't it always be more expensive to grow plants and turn them into fuel than it is to put them in an oil well? Isn't it inevitable that the prices will rise
Time
to
and
such
labor are not do not have an intrinsic value. You don't understand the difference between value and price.
Well, I mean, you don't understand. When a robot does something that a human used to do and does so for significantly cheaper and is vastly more productive, that doesn't change the value of anything at all. In fact, the value of everything has remained static since the beginning of time.
Yeah,
So,
coat because as we all know, parkas are just as valuable to people in the Bahamas as they are to people in Alaska.
I remember, I believe it was in, I believe, what was it? I believe My Two Cents actually pointed this out that Mr. Beast went out of his way to try to make a chicken sandwich from scratch, insofar as he grew the wheat himself, processed it into bread. He bought the chickens, or bought chicks, raised them into chickens, slaughtered them, and processed the meat into something that's edible, prepared it, and then put it together into a sandwich, all made by him. And his response at the end was that it was mediocre. However, the whole process cost him around $5,000. So from that point of view, that would mean that chicken sandwiches, as they're being presented as I'm sorry, that the true value of a chicken sandwich is $5,000. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and that's also a reason why like this is actually something that's been internally debated among the Austrians, most notably Baumwerk and Mises had a debate about this. Basically, it pertains to the theory of capital according to the Austrians. It's a debate of whether or not capital is just uh, resources being used to produce, or whether or not there's something more to it. And that's sort of how how time preference theory was developed. Because in this example, there's very clearly a difference um, in how you're investing your time between just going to a store, getting a chicken sandwich, or spending months and thousands of dollars to make yourself a chicken sandwich. You know, both of those are investing to make a chicken sandwich, but you know, one is obviously going to be um, one way of investing is obviously going to be preferred because it takes less time.
Mm-hmm. And I don't really have much to add to that, so I'm just going to hit continue.
a degree that continued growth agree that continued growth is no longer feasible, and that's on top of the moral predicament that is burning thousands of tons of biofuel while there are millions of people starving each year. I mean, maybe, but only for a short time. Automation will
Millions of
drastically...
people starving where at in parts of the world which either their states have where their states are like little mini Stalinist dystopias, or and they're Stalinist dystopias specifically because the WTO is strong arming them into structuring their legal framework of their markets just for the benefit of larger states like in the EU or North America, for instance.
Keep in mind,
people starving in places where the state has deliberately engineered their societies to where they're exporting everything, the little things that they produce to other parts of the world.
now, if you recall, I'm pretty sure you've seen those capitalism death toll videos that Marxists always like to put out every couple months. The argument, or when you watch all of them, they're always going to make the claim that every single person who has ever died ever as a result of starvation is a result of capitalism simply not giving people free food. So, under that, by our understanding, if people can be morally culpable for everything that they failed to prevent, then that means that SO, you are personally responsible for every person that has ever starved to death ever.
And also though, you could use that same argument, that same criteria to characterize every death as a democide. So an instance where the government killed somebody, because as we argued, the only thing that the government really can do is create artificial scarcity and put people in disadvantaged positions. So if we're going to use that argument, if that's going to be our criteria for what killed people, then like literally everyone ever has died because of the government. So don't think you really want to go down that road, Status. It's not gonna turn out your way. I'll tell you that right now.
It's definitely not. And I love that he's going to try to go back to the kind of moral conundrum about using fossil fuels, all while being rather dismissive of alternatives such as the biofuels, as mentioned earlier. Personally, I don't think there's much of a future in biofuels. However, I could be wrong. But that said, there are still tons of alternatives. For example, I think we've talked about fusion energy in the past. And just like once we've cracked fusion energy, the efficiency and abundance of energy that will enable our society to advance will be so tremendous that we'll end up having a problem where we're going to have to figure out how to get rid of excess heat, excess energy. We're going to have the problem of too much energy, in a sense.
That's another problem with how Vicky is framing this, and this again is not something unique to Vicky. Statists do this a lot when they're building up these sort of straw man arguments against libertarianism or the Austrians, but they are taking a particularly, or at least from Vicky's perspective, they're taking a particularly inefficient model, and they're having their straw man present that as the only potential alternative, as though both to suggest that their opponent thinks that this is something that would be like prescribed onto society in a political sense, but also as though people freely associating with one another in the absence of prescription could only come up with biofuel in this case as their alternative, or their way of undermining what we have with the states markets. You see this a lot with like the line of rhetoric: without police, what are you gonna do? Call a crackhead? Or without volunteer firefighters, how are we? What are you gonna do? Have to give them your credit card before they come save you? Well, I mean, and it's funny to me because like within that argument is sort of an explanation of why a society characterized by the lack of any sort of political intervention probably wouldn't be dominated by those models because, as they're noting, they're inefficient and they create some problems be that would be just sort of ripe for being undermined by other people who actually want these things to be widely available for themselves and others. But yeah, it's a very disingenuous way of arguing because, as noted, it sort of characterizes the opposing position as though it's just one thing. It's like a policy. Like people who argue this literally don't understand. Libertarians are like the idea of arguing outside of a political framework, where it's just this policy or this other policy. But there can never be the absence of any sort of prescriptive model or state intervention, which is limiting people's options to where they could only use a certain model of organization, or they could only use resources in a certain way without being harassed by the state's enforcers.
All right. Anyways, just gonna continue.
Reduce the cost of production, biofuel will be so cheap that everyone will be able to afford it much more easily than they're affording fossil fuels right now. But technology is nowhere near advanced enough to automatically take care of something as complex as farming. Machines can barely do assembly line work right now. Oh, you must have forgotten about Moore's law. Every year processor speed gets 2 times as fast or the processor's price is reduced by half. Technology is actually growing at an exponential rate as well. Just look around, 10 years ago none of this technology would have existed, but nowadays it does. The future will hold great things for us in the same way. I am afraid Moore's law is not true. Have a look at this. According to Moore's law, within 10 years, processor speed would increase 100-fold. The most powerful Intel processor in 2010 was the i7-980X. And the most powerful processor today is the Intel i9 10900X. But the i9 is not even 5 times as powerful as the i7. They cost about the same at release. Moore's law may have been accurate in the past, in the 80s and 90s, but just like the economy, the tech sector is not an exponential growth, but a logistic one. And we're approaching...
I wasn't saying anything, sorry, but because for the most part, Vicky gets a point here because, and this is something that I haven't really put out any like content about this. Yeah, I've been skeptical of Moore's law as an axiom. I think rather it's I guess a way of sort of characterizing a trend. It's obviously not true in a normative sense. For instance, you can increase for one, a big part of the reason, like a big part of what's limiting computer efficiency right now in terms of how they can process data is kernel side limitations, which for those who don't know, the kernel is the layer between the network and the hardware. So if you were to change things on the software side, you would be able to actually change how efficient your computer is. So, but back to the subject in question, I guess I would give Vicky a point for that, although that's not the Austrian argument against against like the problems of automation that Vicky is bringing up. Again, this is a case of is-ought, where the only potential solution presented by the other side could be a policy, a prescribed policy, a prescribed suggestion, as though it's sort of the only thing that people would be able to do. And they're sort of obviously providing the problem with that, but Vicky doesn't really understand computers enough to understand that they're what they're arguing actually sort of would help the Austrians out because Moore's law may not be strictly true, but the actual truth of the matter only further ensures that technological production will be as distributed as possible. And the only reason it's not now can largely be boiled down to artificial costs created by the patent system, and also because of state intervention, and the artificial costs created by the state's intervention, in terms of limiting the availability of resources. So it could be right now. We could be self-employed right now. It's just that, as I can't remember the name of the author, but as they put it, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And the reason it's not is, well, the state.
Mm-hmm. Not really much to say. There are various technological alternatives that are in development as we speak. I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar, at least conceptually, with quantum computing, how a single qubit is able to exist in theoretically infinite number of states. And there's also chip alternatives. I know that they're developing a revised version of the vacuum tube that's significantly smaller and is proving to be more powerful than modern transistors, as well as the possibility of optical computing, where instead of processing being done by sending electrons through circuits, they're going to send tiny beams of light through moissanite circuits and through optic fibers. That kind
Yeah.
of stuff is being developed and promises to, for lack of a better term, restart Moore's law. Now,
Yeah. So
granted, those are also going to come to their own limits. They're not going to go exponentially. They're going to go logarithmically. However, it still would at least create an entirely new jump in processing power, in addition to the possibility of new forms of processing that we can't even conceive of yet, including the not zero possibility of FTL communications through quantum entanglement, assuming that that even works the way we think it does.
yeah, that's another issue here. There's the prospect of photonic technology, which, those who aren't familiar, is basically just what Heretic was describing. Technology fueled by photons as opposed to electrons. And yeah, that this is, I guess, ironically, it's the problem with planning. It's with the Vicky's trying to make the case for economic planning, but the fact you can only really consider these one person can really only consider these small range of options is sort of in a I guess in a not so strict sense kind of demonstrates the issues with planning. Yeah, Vicky, I'd be willing to argue probably doesn't even know what photonic technology is or is not familiar with the concept.
Probably not. I mean, they don't even understand the difference between any other kind of non-Marxoid philosophy and just lumps it all together into a hideous amalgamation.
Then there's also, even if we were to assume that technological expansion, that technological growth, whatever that means to Vicky, occurred in a logistical trend, which, by the way, not really given an explanation of why these trends work the way Vicky is claiming that they do as an axiom, other than just they have the tendency to do that. I'll go more into that in the actual video, the Breadlets video. But yeah, then there's also the factor of Say's law, where it doesn't really matter the fact that they're more productive with less input, i.e., i.e., wealth, more wealth is being created with them. That sort of alone invalidates the point that they're trying to make. But anyway, do
Don't
you
really
want
have,
to continue?
yeah, sorry, I don't really have much more to add to that. So, anyways, I'm just going to continue.
The limit of what's technologically possible. Process can only get so small and so cheap.
Yeah, did
well,
you catch that? He just made the falling rate of profit argument. So
Yeah, he also made a very strong appeal to the Malthusianism that we talked about before. Oh, we're at the limits of what's technologically possible. No, we're at the limits of what's technologically possible under a state.
yeah,
There's a very
that
clear demarcation between the two.
it's not that resources actually are existing in a zero sum, strictly material sense. It's that that's sort of the way that the state needs to treat them in order to engineer these political economies. And we're getting to the point in the information age where that is not becoming possible in any consistent sense. Anyway, we'll continue.
Just give me a second. I'm trying to do something. All right, it didn't work. All right, continuing.
Quantum computers will solve this. Quantum computers are not what they're hyped up to be. They aren't just more powerful computers, they're specialized machines built for specialized purposes. And yes, in those cases they're a lot better, but you can't have a quantum processor in your phone because your phone wouldn't have use for it. Well, technology will solve it.
I can't think of why you wouldn't want a quantum processor in your phone if you had need for a quantum processor in your phone. Why would you want a quantum processor in your phone? I don't frickin' know, but that's not up to me, is it?
Your operating system on your desktop can benefit from quantum computing, but your operating system on your phone, nah. Vicky is such a fucking retard. Holy shit.
And I just love the way
This is why you don't try to, I think this is sort of common knowledge when it comes to debates or discussing philosophy. Don't fucking try and step out of your league in terms of the things that you're actually familiar with, because you just end up embarrassing yourself. And that's a lesson that Vicky desperately needs. But based on the way that they responded to Shane Killian, when Shane Killian shot a response to Vicky, that is something that they're probably too narcissistic to ever take into consideration. So they're just going to continue stepping in shit for the foreseeable future.
This reminds me of another argument, which might sound familiar to a lot of people. Well, you don't really need a military-style semi-automatic assault frying pan. It's too dangerous. But anyways, yeah, you're gonna need to clip that, by the way, because that was freaking hilarious. Anyways,
yeah, this is definitely going in the Bread Blitz episode. When it's up, it'll be pretty beautiful.
oh yeah. So anyways, I'm just gonna hit continue here.
The market will find a way to grow even if Moore's law turns out to be false. No, it won't. There is no way for any system to keep growing forever. It's logically and logistically impossible, and there will be a cap at some point. No, there won't be. The market will grow forever. No, it won't. At some point it will run out of resources to exploit, out of oil to drill, out of fish to catch, and out of minerals to mine, and out of labor to exploit. The resources are not infinite, and that means that the growth has to stop. No, it has to keep growing. It cannot stop. What do you mean it cannot stop? It has to stop according to every natural law. No! If the market stops growing, this entire fucking system will collapse. What are you even talking about? The banks. What about the banks?
Oh no. Is trying to appeal to the Austrian business cycle theory. Oh, this ought to be funny.
I'm not so sure. Let's just see. I'm just going to see where this is going.
Banks make money by loaning money, and the only reason their customers can pay them back more than they received is because their businesses are growing. And for everyone to be able to pay back their loans, everyone's business has to grow, which means that the entire economy has to grow. Go on. And if the economy stops growing, the banks can no longer make a profit. So they will stop loaning out money, and without loans, nobody can start a new business, which means competition and innovation would grind to a halt, and all big corporations would just swallow the small ones, and we'd end up in a new form of feudalism without class mobility, and it just can't stop growing. But it will eventually. Nothing can grow forever. No. Yes. No. If it stops.
I feel like an increasing percentage of this video is just them shouting no, yes, no at each other.
Yeah. I mean, we could go ahead and end it here because, long story short, that is pretty much what the rest of this video at least is going to be. Yeah. So they kind of gish galloped over that section, obviously, even though that was, I guess it was a pretty accurate explanation in a loose sense of, if you're going to look at this from the perspective of a political economy, why political economies are not sustainable. But again, they run into problems because they're trying to extrapolate that onto markets themselves. I mean, come on, even Marx made this distinction in his section of Capital Volume 1, where Marx is talking about primitive accumulation. Marx noted markets existed in the absence of a state.
Mm-hmm.
Like even according to classical Marxism, this is so what Vicky's arguing here is not even Marxism. It's autistic. But yeah,
Well, he's got a quirky Eastern European accent, so he must be right.
But yeah, this is actually very similar to the argument, as noted, that Austrians would make for why you cannot prescribe economies, or why attempts to do so are pseudoscientific and will inevitably collapse in on themselves. And as Konkin and the other counter economists have pointed out, and as history has shown, when that inevitably happens and when the political economies sort of maximize their crisis tendencies, the gray market and I guess the actual market will end up creating a counter infrastructure to sort of people in that market will create a counter infrastructure so that people don't fucking just die.
Pretty much. Like even if you were to come up with a point at which you could say that there is a material cap in terms of the amount of production that could be done, even if that did theoretically exist, it could. However, that cap is so far beyond what even we've achieved, like remotely, that it's inconceivable that we would be even approaching that gap. We are at that gap. We are at that cap right now in terms of what a economy under a state is capable of maintaining. But that's just a problem of the existence of a state, isn't it?
Yeah, and something that Vicky mentioned towards the end there is, he tried to gish gallop over it, but he asserted that in the collapse of these markets, the big corporations would just swallow up the other ones. That's what he said. Well, first of all, that assumes that corporations themselves exist in the absence of a state, which no, they're a product of the joint stock system, which is which is itself a holdover from the mercantile guild system, i.e., a product of feudalism. But yeah, the idea of a corporation swallowing up another, well, that seems to be alluding to IP, and well, again, IP is a product of the state. I
Mhm.
can see why he sort of gish galloped over that, because it doesn't really make sense unless you're not thinking about it.
It doesn't really. It's not meant to make sense. It's just meant to be some conclusion that he can just spit out to people. And as I said before, his audience are people who are equally as idiotic as he is, but less articulate. So he's just going to try to put this forward as though it were some inconceivable, as though it were some inconceivable and indisputable fact, and people are just supposed to accept it immediately because the straw man neoliberal said it, so therefore it must be something that they believe to be true, even if they don't admit it.
It doesn't make sense though, even like it doesn't make sense even again if we were to assume that market incentives functioned the way that Vicky is characterizing them. If resources were less available, then how would organizations which depend more on said resources be able to exert any sort of um, bargaining pressure on organizations which are trying to compete with them? That doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But,
I mean, there's so much here that needs to be unpacked. That's very difficult to imagine. I mean, keep in mind that the way banks currently organize is, well, I mean, we've talked about this quite a lot in the past about about fractional reserve banking and how the banking system is highly structured around incentives that are created by the central banks and the federal government. That it's inconceivable to imagine that, well, I mean, banks existed prior to the Federal Reserve, so it's not like they won't continue to exist. But even then, it's like, even if this whole thing were absolutely correct, so what about the banks? Which I'm pretty sure is going to be the conclusion that Vicky's eventually going to get to. However, it's going to be so ridiculous and idiotic that it's amazing that he would even attempt to put this forward as a justification of any sort. It's
I mean,
yeah.
in the absence of a central bank, reserve banking was still the dominant model because of incentives created by the Treasury. So,
Mhm.
on top of that, as I've argued, fraction reserve banking models inevitably have to become fractional reserve banks in order to externalize their maintenance costs. Because the problem with reserve banks is that they're inherently set up to try and prescribe rates of interest, which means that they have to print, which means that they're sort of dependent upon printing money in order to in order to both try and maintain themselves, but also they exist in a constant state of calculational chaos, since the interest rates that they're operating around are just sort of made up by themselves. And they just kind of have like a supply of resources that are not money, but are, they have a lot of utility. So they can create money substitutes around them, like gold, for instance. The problem is that because they have to just sort of print money in order to continue existing, they are eventually going to print more money than they would ever be able to back up with the gold that they have in store. So yeah, you're gonna run into that's going to basically cause either the collapse of that entire banking industry, so to speak, or the state's going to come along and allow them to scale upwards by create establishing a central bank corporation.
Another thing that they gish galloped over was, and I think I mentioned this twice in this video, is that, and just to answer Patrick Bannock's question in the comments, this is a Vicky 1991 video. 1999, I keep forgetting, not really important. But he gish galloped over how the economy and the banking system basically requires, or can basically just produce infinite money to make sure that growth keeps going on forever, which only shows just how unimaginably non-understanding, or just their unimaginable non-understanding of non-Marxoid viewpoints. I don't even know like if he even talks to anyone who isn't a Marxist, because this isn't something I don't think even Keynesians believe. It's certainly not something that modern monetary theorists believe, since
Yeah.
they want to control the amount of money that exists through the system of inflation offset by taxation to make sure to prevent inflation. But the Keynesians, they want to cause inflation to occur at roughly the same rate of growth, and so the two kind of work together in a very strange way. This isn't actually true, of course, but that's just what they believe. And so
That's how they try.
the idea that just money printing engineers growth, or that you need money printing to keep growth going on forever, fundamentally shows a disconnect of understanding from the perspective of Vicky as to how economic growth actually occurs. Which, of course, if you're a Marxist, makes total sense why you don't know why economic growth actually occurs. It's a function of people seeking individually their own more highly valued preferences, because guess what? They can extract more marginal value out of a given good or service than the person who originally produced or is currently utilizing it. Hence, they're willing to pay more to achieve. They're willing to pay more to achieve that good or service, and will thus acquire it. The economic growth is just simply a factor of, well, efficiency and production. There's really nothing special about it. There's nothing about that implies monetary growth whatsoever. I know why he gets to come to get I know why he figures that out. I'm just kind of baffled that this is something that someone actually wrote. This is a script that someone actually wrote. This is something that he bothered drawing in MS Paint. And at every point of production for this video, I can imagine that he thought that this was he didn't have any second he didn't doubt himself at all. He didn't second guess, like think, oh wow, this sounds really dumb. I'm not making making my opponents look as good as possible in order to, demonstrate that I understand their position and that I can effectively refute it. This is honestly embarrassing.
Yeah, he probably didn't even fucking. He probably didn't even realize it was dumb. I'd imagine that just when he ran into roadblocks with his understanding of not even his opponent's position, but his own position, he goes over to the Wikipedia page for neoliberalism. I'd be willing to bet that's probably what he did. I mean, it's better. I guess it's the closest thing I have to an explanation for how you make this shit up.
I guess so. Well, my guess is that he went to r/neoliberal and had a few conversations there with the one or two unironic neoliberals on the planet, or at least the self-proclaimed neoliberals. And then he had like one or two conversations there, probably under an alias. And it was probably I probably need to find those Reddit posts specifically, but I imagine that they were along the lines of, "You freaking neoliberal scum are destroying the environment! How dare you!" And that was basically the conversation of everyone, including the people who were just there for memes or whatnot, just going, "Dude, calm down."
Yeah, I'd imagine he probably that that's a step too far for Vicky, because that means actually having to listen to the arguments put forward by people who aren't Marxists, and having to understand what they actually think.
Oh, no. I didn't say like he listened to them. I just said that he made inflammatory accusatory remarks about them, and they were telling him just like, "Dude, what the hell are you talking about?" Even the self-proclaimed neoliberals probably think that this guy's dumb.
Yeah, but that's just sort of that's what I meant, though, is that implies that there was an attempt on his part to understand what is, from his perspective, another point of view. And I don't even think that he does that, frankly. This
Mhm.
is sort of what I was hinting at earlier. Vicky 1999, I've mentioned on stream previously something I've come to refer to as philosophical inbreeding, where a community will discourage people to actually have discussions with people who propose opposing principles or opposing methodologies, which is a red flag if that ever happens in a group that you're in. But it will do this, and the people obviously putting forward this position will then make straw man versions of what they claim those opposing positions are, and because their audience doesn't actually look up what those people have argued themselves or actually read any material from opposing points of view. What they will do is they will then use those straw man arguments to build on to their own philosophical understanding of the subject, and then people will take inspiration from those figures who have taken inspiration from the initial figures who discouraged looking into other views, and that will inspire their own views, and so on until you get people like Vicky who attempt to unironically ascribe the Keynesian multiplier argument to the Austrians, doesn't understand the difference between the Austrians and other attempts to study markets, and attempts to characterize the Keynesian multiplier argument as money will just continue being supplied and you can never supply enough money.
Hold on a second.
Oh, okay.
I just wrote something to you in DMs. Want to get your thoughts on it real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I was just going to compare. I was just going to get to point out that Vicky comes off to me as an atomic ANCAP. I don't know if people remember him. He was some anarcho-capitalist kid content creator, and was basically for a while considered to be Mr. Dapperton's son. But what was interesting is that he didn't really come up with his own arguments. He didn't do his own research. He just watched Mr. Dapperton's videos and then regurgitated his arguments with different formulations. And it came off that he was coming up with his own arguments, but he actually was just, regurgitating what Mr. Dapperton said. Now, I've got the feeling that Vicky is basically the same way, where Vicky was born and raised, probably, maybe even literally, in a Marxist echo chamber, and without actually having done any research on his own or reading, he's regurgitating content from other people who haven't done any research whatsoever into the subject, and just, at best, go off of other people's content. It's entirely self-feeding, and it's basically what you have is a game of telephone where the original message gets distorted over and over again to the point where Vicky is the last person on the line who says just something that's complete and utter gibberish that is completely different than what the original message was.
Yeah, I would imagine, now, as I've sort of pointed out in that last video, he's not even arguing Marxist theory at this point, and a lot of Marxists don't even argue for Marxist theory. That's aside from the fact that, we're far beyond, at least from these people's perspective, being in the sort of mentality where we're questioning whether or not what Marx is saying is valid, or attempting to explain in a competitive framework why Marx's principles explain more than other principles which attempt to provide a better understanding of nature. We're beyond that point. But they, because they the concept of left unity you hear from these circles, that itself showcases exactly what the problem is. Attempting to actually critically analyze the arguments that they're putting forward is strongly discouraged by these communities, and that inevitably results in these communities themselves not even really knowing what they're talking about, not even understanding the ideas that they claim to be proponents of.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, this is.
I wouldn't even consider myself particularly sophisticated on Marx's theory, but I've demonstrated I understand it better than Vicky does.
I mean, that's not a very high mark to reach. I think a conservatard who has only heard about it from talking with other Marxists in online debates, after a long enough time, you actually do start to pick up on a lot of their principles. And I imagine that they could demonstrate a lot of those arguments a lot better than Vicky could. And in fact, I've even done so because I think it was 2018, April Fool's Day. I did a video about or responding to Postal Cat from the perspective of an anarcho-communist, and I think I did a pretty decent job, all things considered. I actually was watching that video like a couple weeks ago, and I was just like, yeah, that's actually pretty good. But
But I don't know. We've had more than a 5-minute break, so do you want to move on to the next video? But it's a voluntary system, right?
all right. Uh, I'm looking at the thumbnail right here, which you guys won't be able to see, but it just says the caption, "Is capitalism voluntary?" And given that you've already told me in the past that he's used the neoliberal label unironically, I know we're in for a treat. I mean, do we have to?
I mean, there is literally a video on his channel arguing for the existence of a decentralized, centrally planned economy, and he's being 100% serious. But yeah, we were supposed to be responding to 3 videos. Thankfully, that's not one of them because there's not really a whole lot to talk about in the decentralized, centrally planned economy video. The title refutes itself. It's self-contradictory. But yeah, we should start the video because I don't really have a whole lot else to say on the
All
matter.
right. Yeah, and it turns out I was wrong. Actually, the audience will be able to see the thumbnail. That's actually pretty good, but not really much to look at. But
Right.
yeah, if you're operating on the basis of just using the term capitalism, you know you're not dealing with you're dealing with a smooth brain.
Yeah, we're just to clarify for anyone who might not be any of our regular viewers, capitalism and free markets are not the same thing.
Yeah.
At least that's the perspective we're coming from. If we're going to look at capitalism as a concept, it doesn't really seem to explain anything, or it's not really clear what it's characterizing. Seems to be an all-encompassing term of the same nature as neoliberalism, but and there's also the aspect of, would we characterize the artificial property claims created by the state as capitalist, or even according to the way that it's described, it's a society characterized by everything being private, which, as we know, it's not possible to claim uh, to exclusively own certain resources in societies without states, because doing so would entail aggression against others, like claiming the roads around someone else's house to give a famous example, or at least the example I like citing,
Hmm. So
because
any
claiming those resources would entail the use of aggression in an active sense against others. But what were you gonna say? I'm sorry.
nothing. Sorry, I'm just doing multiple things at the moment, so I'm a little distracted. So anyways, I'm just gonna hit play. Let's see where this goes. But judging by the thumbnail, I'm gonna say it's I'm gonna make a few predictions here. It's gonna follow that same that straw man conversational format of Vicky's self-insert versus the neoliberal, and the neoliberal is gonna try to justify why they threw him in jail for doing something probably very silly.
All right.
So let's go.
And that is why no will always be exploited by them, because of the way capitalism is structured. The labor theory of value basically proves this beyond doubt. You can never get paid the true value of your labor because the employer always takes the surplus value. And
Oh
this
my
is
god. What a great way to start. Okay, so there's the morally loaded term exploited, which, by the way, that's another way, I guess, in which Marx deviates away from studies of markets. He adds moral concepts into the study of markets, even though they're not, there's not really any coherent way to do that. If we're looking strictly at incentives and how people, could conceivably use their resources, or how people will be how people would be or are incentivized to do so. So, there's sort of question being raised of what are the ethical views we're referring to, and do those hold up? And considering that Marx was a materialist, he didn't even actually believe ethical philosophy was a thing. So that's quite funny. But yeah, then there's also that's going to be kind of a problem plaguing this entire video. You haven't proven that there's any sort of coercion occurring, and I'm aware that because I watched the video before the stream. That's basically going to be at the point that he attempts to have the his straw man character attempts to put forward a straw man version of the argument that I'm about to make. But I don't know. I guess we could continue playing, so that he makes the straw man argument first, because I'm kind of getting a bit ahead of myself, maybe.
employer-employee relationships are always unjust. Yeah, you say that, but what you neglect to mention is the fact that the employee has consented to this relationship. If both employer and employee agree to it, then it has to be, if not just, at least voluntary. And if people want to work this way, there is no reason to prohibit it. You can't just prevent other people from making consensual choices. Yes, we can. Sometimes we have to prohibit some things in order to protect people from themselves.
Yeah.
I wanted him to continue that. Like I love the subtitles here because it actually does make what he's saying a little bit more legible, because accents can be a little thick at times.
Yeah, and he's also gish galloping, so.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he's in the process of making a nuclear take, so we're gonna probably, when we do address it, we might have to go back a few seconds. But just what I was going to say is that this is not at this is the reason this is a straw man version of the argument is because what we have right now is not a market free of intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that he's characterizing this argument is the way that like vulgar libertarians would characterize it, as if we're just referring to a market free of any sort of intervention. Well, no, we have all sorts of interventions. The previous examples I've gone over, but basically the way that the entire legal framework in state societies is structured around artificial incentives created by either privilege or artificial scarcity, and codependencies based upon that. So yeah, the actual Austro-libertarian argument would be, not necessarily to even disagree with Vicky, but as I sort of mentioned to Radical Reviewer on the stream, it's not. It's to propose a competing. It's to propose a competing means of solving this problem that Vicky is attempting to argue against by introducing competition.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, I'm just going to hit continue.
Like, for example, you can't consent to selling yourself as a slave, and some people are too young or uninformed to consent.
You can't sell yourself as a fucking slave.
Strictly speaking, that's true, but only because it's logically impossible. The definition of slavery is involuntary labor. So by definition, doing an involuntary thing voluntarily would just be a contradiction and therefore couldn't exist in nature, much in the same way that you can't draw a squared circle. That would just be a contradiction.
He has to phrase it that way because if he phrased it the way or if he put it the way that libertarians actually argue it, i.e., questioning why there's such an artificial scarcity of resources to the point where people are to the point where the only options available to a lot of people seems to be to work in sweatshops or to work at McDick's. If he were to put forward that argument as opposed to characterizing this as some sort of as can sell yourself into slavery, or you can't sell yourself into slavery, he would immediately run into the self-evident problem of, well, the state is there.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess in a more broad sense, the way that he characterized his counter, sometimes we have to protect people from themselves. Yeah, good lord, this is another one of those instances where there's like 10 things to unpack. First of all, he's talking about the state. And what the state does is coerce people. By nature, the state cannot, quote unquote, protect people. The state can only ever be a parasite or aggress against people. And there's also just to start, and there's also the problem of, they're people too. So this is a passing the buck argument. What sort of if we're going to apply this reasoning to states intervening, what aren't politicians people? Why are they exempt from that principle? Aren't their political partners people too? Why are they exempt from that principle? Then there's what were you gonna say?
Nothing. Continue.
Then there's there's the problem as well of assuming that in the absence of a state, creating all this artificial scarcity and privileging certain people, that people would just sit on their hands and not do anything to protect one another, even though this is provably wrong in a historical sense. Mutual aid communities existed in the 19th century because they were sort of for certain areas they were the best options for demographics, certain demographics to get health care, for instance. No, the only thing that the state ever could do is coerce people and either create scarcity or create privileged classes of people. And I think a counter example Marxian types would like to provide would be, they like to say, "Oh, look, the state created minimum wage." Well, yeah, that's exactly what minimum wage is. It's making it literally illegal for people to compete and to sell their labor in certain aspects of the market. If you look at what the so-called safety net is, that's literally just allowing corporations to externalize maintenance costs onto these social programs, so that they don't have to pay their employees more competitive rates.
Mm-hmm. Don't really have much more to say to that, but anyways, I'm just going to continue here. Though,
But hold on. I was just gonna say as well. That's sort of the problem when you operate within a presuppositional framework. You could say that anything can conform to any particular interpretation of what something is structured to do, and you could never be challenged unless we are going to challenge that particular methodology. In the case of Marxism, how would you be able to challenge, from the perspective of the material dialectic, the notion that the so-called social safety net that a lot of people refer to uh, is actually a benefit to the state? It actually exists specifically to benefit in the political industry the state's created.
all right. Sorry if I'm not saying much. I've been distracted for a bit. Been doing multiple
Well,
things right now.
sorry that I cut you off because you were going to say something as well.
It's all right. Anyways, let's
Okay,
continue. I'm very
sure.
curious as to what this guy's standard of consent is, because I have a feeling he doesn't have one.
For example, children cannot consent to having sex because they're not ready to make that decision. Well, actually,
Oh
I think that
God.
the age of consent shouldn't be quite as restrictive as it is right now. After all,
Fuck
why should the
off.
government... Stop it. Why?
Yeah, fuck you. I'm sorry. It really pisses me off when statists try to ascribe that position to libertarians. Aside from the fact that that obviously is not actually a libertarian position, just to get that out of the way, just to get that out of the way really quickly. Libertarians are the libertarian position is that children can't consent until they're biologically mature, because before then they can't actually provide informed consent.
Mm-hmm.
But this is actually a far greater problem with authoritarian positions. If you're really gonna fucking go there, let's fucking go there. What if the state says that there isn't an age of consent? And according to your framework, where the only way that people can be protected is if you have this political framework going around and aggressing against people the way that the state says that they should be aggressed against. Even though I guess in that instance it wouldn't be it wouldn't that strict instance would not be uh, aggression, but the state's funding of that service would be aggression. So that's grounds thickness. But yeah. How would a statist respond to that, or a Marxist? What if the commune votes for it? Yeah, statism ends up coming out way worse on that question than the libertarian position does.
I mean, they don't even have to. They don't even have the ability to demonstrate when when it is okay for a kid to consent. It's entirely arbitrary. I mean, what is it that makes? I don't know. Let's use a non-controversial example and say that there's a government that has 19 as the age of consent. So why not 18 years and 364 days? Because there's 364 days or 365 days of the year. Why not 18 years, 364 days and 23 hours, or 22 hours and 59 minutes, 58 minutes, 57 minutes? What's the magical threshold that the state has come to figure out when it is? They don't have an ability. They don't really have an ability. It's honestly
But
quite disgusting. I mean, I know what this
honestly,
is all to do. It's just like to help make his strawman neoliberal look like a disgusting person. But I mean, it's such a cliche now that when people bring it up, that I just can't help but think the absolute worst of the people who bring this up.
Yeah, it's a when anybody brings this up, if somebody brings this up in the Backalley server, if they try and ascribe that argument to libertarians, I just fucking ban them because I can't help but, that basically, it's, for one, it's a subtle character assassination. It's actually a very disgusting character assassination. But on top of that, it's also very clearly, it's an attempt to try and it's an attempt to try and like subtly frame their opponent as a bad person. It's not an intellectually honest. It's not an intellectually honest question.
Mhm.
On top of the fact that libertarians actually have a question, an answer for that on ethical grounds. I didn't even really get into the fact that how people, that ethical conclusions are just that, from the libertarian perspective, conclusions. And the fact of the matter is that the libertarian position would actually probably be something more along the lines of throw those motherfuckers into a wood chipper.
Mhm. I'm honestly tempted to just like end the stream right here because I have two big pet peeves. One is people singing. The other one is people who are obvious who demonstrate being disingenuous. And this is the most clear example I can think of people who are being disingenuous. So honestly, I'm really tempted to just like end the stream because I don't want to waste my time with this piece of shit anymore.
All right. If you don't want to continue this one, could we at least like get into the LTV video
Sure. Where is that?
for a little bit? It's like 40 minutes long though, so
Like, how long are we going to go into that one?
uh yeah, you're right. Maybe we should just end here because yeah, that's gonna take hours.
That's going to take all night. I mean, by the time we're done, the sun will already be rising, and I'll be hearing little ghosts going. I'll be hearing ghosts making little goat noises. We don't have roosters here. We have goats. But
Well,
it,
yeah, I got enough material to work with in that video, and it's not going to be as difficult now to finish up writing it. I can't say when it will be done, but I'm probably going to clip the part of the stream that was about the election, because the election's a bit of a hot topic right now, and that would get us a lot of views. But
mhm.
yeah, I definitely am not looking forward to finishing up that essay. But I need to so that I can get on to other essays.
Although I got some bad news for you.
Oh, what's that?
You're planning on making this into a series. There's going to be other Vicky 1999s.
Not as of right now. The next one, for instance, is well, I'm not going to say who the next one is right now, but they're not anywhere near as bad as Vicky 1999. This should have been like a season finale or something. It should not have been the first fucking. This should not have been the first fucking one I responded to. Oh my god.
Yeah, this is I mean, like I think I said before that if you're trying to do a dialogue where you're playing both sides, you have to make sure that you're representing the other side as reasonably as possible. They're not always going to be
Yeah,
right, but that's
I can't help but make, like, if I were to try and you can't even really represent Vicky's position like without I, I could probably just pull footage of like someone with Down syndrome in a classroom spurging out that being used to represent Vicky's position, because that basically intellectually is the equivalent of Vicky's position. But yeah, it's gonna be kind of difficult. That's the reason I even decided we should have done this on a stream, because it would be difficult to actually like write a way of framing this. So I guess an introduction to Vicky's content, I got that down now. So it's gonna make it a lot easier at the very least.
Yeah, and Daniel Von Strangle in the comments asks if we plan on doing more streams with left libertarians in the future, because he remembers our stream with Radical Reviewer. But we were going to get Radical Reviewer for another stream, but he wasn't able to make it for whatever reason. So yeah, we definitely want to be doing that more in the future.
We have a pretty big one coming up. It sounds like in December as well, but we're not gonna. In the meantime, we're not gonna say anything about that.
And there's another one, arguably even bigger, who has expressed interest in joining it. However, won't be able to join for a couple more months because they're pretty busy.
Who I was talking about.
What?
I think that's who I was talking about.
Well, we have two guys lined up. What?
All right. The door is open and like somebody's ringtone went off in the background.
Okay.
So I guess we're gonna go ahead and end it here. Thanks everyone for watching. This is gonna be a very entertaining series, to say the least. Based on the fact that this is the first one. This is the first part.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we'll see you on Friday.